Chapter 13. It was now the summer of 1833. Immigration had poured into the county of Jackson in great numbers, and the church in that county now numbered upwards to 1,000 souls. These had all purchased lands and paid for them, and most of them were improving in buildings and in cultivation. Peace and plenty had crowned their labors, and the wilderness became a fruitful field, and the solitary place began to bud and blossom as the rose. They lived in peace and quiet, no lawsuits with each other or with the world. Few or no debts were contracted, few promises broken. There were no thieves, robbers, or murderers, few or no idlers. All seemed to worship God with a hearty heart. On Sundays, the people assembled to preach, pray, sing, and receive the ordinances of God. Other days all seemed busy in the various pursuits of industry. In short, there has seldom, if ever, been a happier people upon the earth than the church of the saints now were. In the latter part of summer and in the autumn, I devoted almost my entire time in ministering among the churches, holding meetings, visiting the sick, comforting the afflicted, and giving counsel. A school of elders was also organized, over which I was called to preside. This class, to the number of about 60, met for instruction once a week. The place of meeting was in the open air, under some tall trees in a retired place in the wilderness, where we prayed, preached, and prophesied, and exercised ourselves in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Here great blessings were poured out, and many great and marvelous things were manifest and taught. The Lord gave me great wisdom and enabled me to teach and edify the elders and comfort and encourage them in their preparations for the great work which lay before us. I was also much edified and strengthened. To attend this school, I had to travel on foot and sometimes with bare feet at that. About 6 miles. This I did once a week, besides visiting and preaching in 5 or 6 branches a week. While thus engaged, and in answer to our correspondence with the prophet Joseph Smith at Kirtland, Ohio, the following revelation was sent to us by him, dated August 1833. Verily I say unto you, my friends, I speak unto you with the voice, even the voice of my spirit, that I may show unto you my will concerning your brethren in the land of Zion, many of whom are truly humble and are seeking diligently to learn wisdom and to find truth. Verily, verily, I say unto you, blessed are such, for they shall obtain. For I, the Lord, show mercy unto all the meek, and upon all whomsoever I will, that I may be justified when I shall bring them unto judgment. Behold, I say unto you, concerning the school in Zion, I, the Lord, am well pleased that there should be a school in Zion, and also with my servant Parley Pratt, for he abideth in me. And inasmuch as he continueth to abide in me, he shall continue to preside over the school in the land of Zion, until I shall give unto him other commandments. And I will bless him with a multiplicity of blessings, in expounding all scriptures and mysteries to the edification of the school and of the church in Zion, and to the residue of the school. I, the Lord, am willing to show mercy. Nevertheless, there are those that must needs be chastened, and their works shall be made known. The axe is laid at the root of the tree, and every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit shall be hewn down and cast into the fire. I, the Lord, have spoken it. Verily I say unto you, all among them who know their hearts are honest, and are broken, and their spirits are contrite, and are willing to observe their covenants by sacrifice, yea, every sacrifice which I, the Lord, shall command. They are accepted of me. For I, the Lord, will cause them to bring forth a very fruitful tree, which is planted in a goodly land by a pure stream that yieldeth much precious fruit. Verily I say unto you, that it is my will that a house should be built unto me in the land of Zion, like unto the pattern which I have given you. Yea, let it be built speedily by the tithing of my people. Behold, this is the tithing and the sacrifice which I, the Lord, require at their hands, that there may be a house built unto me for the salvation of Zion, for a place of thanksgiving for all saints, and for a place of instruction for all those who are called to the work of the ministry in all their several callings and offices, that they may be perfected in the understanding of their ministry, in theory, in principle, and in doctrine, and in all things pertaining to the kingdom of God on the earth, and the keys of which kingdom have been conferred upon you. The keys of which kingdom have been conferred upon you. And inasmuch as my people build a house unto me in the name of the Lord, and do not suffer any unclean thing to come into it, that it be not defiled, my glory shall rest upon it. Yea, and my presence shall be there, for I will come into it, and all the pure in heart that shall come into it shall see God. But if it be defiled, I will not come into it, and my glory shall not be there, for I will not come into unholy temples. And now behold, if Zion do these things, she shall prosper, and spread herself, and become very glorious, very great, and very terrible. And the nations of the earth shall honor her, and shall say, Surely Zion is the city of our God. And surely Zion cannot fall, neither be moved out of her place, for God is here, and the hand of the Lord is there, and he hath sworn by the power of his might to be her salvation and her tower, and her high tower. Therefore, verily, thus saith the Lord, let Zion rejoice, for this is Zion, the pure in heart. Therefore let Zion rejoice, while all the wicked shall mourn. For behold, and lo, vengeance cometh speedily upon the ungodly, as the whirlwind, and who shall escape it? The Lord's scourge shall pass over by night and by day, and the report thereof shall vex all people. Yea, it shall not be stayed until the Lord come. For the indignation of the Lord is kindled against their abominations and all their wicked works. Nevertheless, Zion shall escape, if she have served to do all things whatsoever I have commanded her. But if she observe not to do whatsoever I have commanded her, I will visit her according to all her works, with sore affliction, with pestilence, with plague, with sword, with vengeance, with devouring fire. Nevertheless, let it be read this once to her ears, that I, the Lord, have accepted of her offering. And if she sin no more, none of these things shall come upon her, and I will bless her with blessings, and multiply a multiplicity of blessings upon her, and upon her generations forever and ever, saith the Lord your God. Amen. This revelation was not complied with by the elders and church in Missouri as a whole. Notwithstanding, many were humble and faithful. Therefore, the threatened judgment was poured out to the uttermost, as the history of the 5 following years will show. That portion of the inhabitants of Jackson County that did not belong to the church became jealous of our growing influence and numbers. Political demagogues were afraid we would rule the county, and religious priests and bigots felt that we were powerful rivals and about to excel all other societies in the state in number and in power and influence. These feelings and the false statements and influences growing out of them gave rise to the organization of a company of outlaws whose vowed object was to drive the Church of the Saints from the county. These were composed of lawyers, magistrates, county officers, civil and military, religious ministers, and great numbers of the ignorant and uninformed portion of the population, whose prejudices were easily aroused. They commenced operations by assembling in great numbers, destroying a printing office and its materials, demolishing dwellings and stores, and plundering the contents and strewing them in the street, cutting open feather beds, breaking furniture, destroying fences and crops, whipping, threatening, and variously abusing men, women, and children. The saints submitted to these outrages for a time in all patience, without defense or resistance of any kind, supposing that the public authorities would, of course, put a stop to them, as in duty bound. But they were soon convinced to the contrary, and were compelled to take up arms for defense, and also to make the most vigorous exertions to prosecute according to law. We assembled in small bodies in different neighborhoods, and stood on guard during the nights, being ready to march in a moment to any place of attack. I had the command of about 60 men, who were thus assembled in the Colesville branch, and rendezvoused in some log buildings during a very rainy time. It was evening. I was out in the act of posting guards a short distance from the dwellings, when 2 men assailed us, armed with guns and pistols, and supposing it against our principles to make any defense, they attacked the guards. I was without arms, but stepped forward to interfere between them, when one of them drew his gun backward, and with both hands struck the barrel of it across the top of my head. I staggered back, but did not fall. The blood came streaming down my face. I was for an instant stunned by the blow, but, recovering myself, I called for help. I called help from the house, and disarmed them, and put them under guard till morning. Their arms were then restored, and they let go in peace. The taking of these 2 men proved a preventative against an attack that night. They were the advance of a party of men who were about to come upon the settlement, but were disconcerted by this means. On the next day, about sunset, a Mr. Marsh and I set out on horseback to visit the circuit judge at Lexington, a distance of some 40 miles. We were under the necessity of traveling the most private paths across the county in order to avoid our enemies, but we had a most faithful pilot, an old resident of the county, who knew every crook and turn of the different paths. We had ridden but a few miles when it became so excessively dark that we could not see each other or distinguish any object. Our pilot dismounted several times and tried to feel his way. We were at last compelled to halt for some time until it cleared and became a little lighter. But the rain began to fall in torrents and continued all the latter part of the night. We soon became drenched, and every thread about us perfectly wet. But still, we dare not stop for any refreshment or shelter until day dawned, when we found ourselves 40 miles from home and at the door of a friend, where we breakfasted and refreshed ourselves. We then repaired to Lexington and made oath before Judge Ryland of the outrages committed against us, but were refused a warrant. The judge advised us to fight and kill the outlaws whenever they came upon us. We then returned to the place where we breakfasted, and night coming on, we retired to bed, having been without sleep for the 3 previous nights, and much of the time drenched with rain. This, together with the severe wound I had received, caused me to feel much exhausted. No sooner had slept enfolded me in her kind embrace than a vision opened before me. I was in Jackson County, heard the sound of firearms, and saw the killed and wounded lying in their blood. At this I awoke from slumber, and awaking Mr. Marsh and the family with whom we lodged, I told them that I had seen and heard in my dream, and told them what I had seen and heard in my dream, and that I was sure a battle had just occurred. Next morning we pursued our journey homeward with feelings of anxiety indescribable. Every officer of the peace had abandoned us to our fate, and it seemed as if there was no alternative but for men, women, and children to be exterminated. As we rode on, ruminating upon these things, a man met us from Independence, who told us there was a battle raging when he left, and how it had terminated he knew not. This only heightened our feelings of anxiety and suspense. We were every instant drawing nearer to the spot where we might find our friends alive and victorious, or dead, or perhaps in bondage in the hands of a worse than savage enemy. On coming within 4 miles of Independence, we ventured to inquire the distance at a certain house. This we did in order to pass as strangers, and also in hopes to learn some news. The man seemed frightened and inquired where we were from. We replied, from Lexington. Said he, "Have you heard what has happened?" We replied that we had heard there was some difficulty, but of all the participants we had not been informed. Why, said he, the Mormons has riz and killed 6 men. We then passed on, and as soon as we were out of sight, we left the road and took into the woods. Taking a circuitous route through thickets of hazel interwoven with grapevine, we came in sight of Independence. After some difficulty and entanglement, and advanced towards it, but seeing parties of armed men advancing towards us, we wheeled about, and returning a distance, turned again into the woods, and galloping about a half a mile, reached the tents of our friends. But what was our astonishment when we found our brethren without arms, having surrendered them to the enemy. The truth was this: the same evening that I dreamed of the battle, a large body of the outlaws had marched to a certain settlement where they had before committed many outrages, and commenced to unroof dwellings, destroy property, and threaten and abuse women and children. While some 60 men were thus engaged, and their horses quietly regaling themselves in the cornfields of the brethren, about 30 of our men marched upon them and drove them from the field. Several were severely, if not mortally, wounded on both sides, and one young man of the church died of his wounds the next day. His name was Barber. In the battle, Brother Philo Dibble of Ohio was shot in the body through his waistband. The ball remained in him. He bled much inwardly, and in a day or two his bowels were so filled with blood and so inflamed that he was about to die, or rather, he had been slowly dying from the time he was wounded. The smell of him had become intolerable to him and those about him. At length Elder Newell Knight administered to him by the laying on of hands in the name of Jesus. His hands had scarcely touched his head when he felt an operation penetrating his whole system, as it had been a purifying fire. He immediately discharged several quarts of blood and corruption, among which was the ball with which he had been wounded. He was instantly healed and went to work chopping wood. He remained an able-bodied man, a hard worker, and even did military duty for many years after. He is still living in Davis County, Utah. The next morning, November 5th, armed men were assembled in Independence from every part of the county. These joined the outlaws and called themselves militia and placed themselves under the command of Lieutenant Governor Boggs and a colonel by the name of Pitcher. Thus organized, manned, and officed, they were a formidable band of outlaws, capable of murder or any other violence or outrage which would accomplish their purpose, which was to drive the people of the church from the county and plunder their property and possess their land. Very early the same morning, several volunteers united their forces from different branches of the church and marched toward Independence in order to defend their brethren and friends. When without a short distance from the town, they halted and were soon informed that the militia was called out for their protection. But in this they did not place confidence, for they saw that the armed body congregated had joined with the mobbers and outlaws, and were one with them to carry out their murderous purposes. On communicating with the leaders, Boggs and Pitcher, it was found that there was no alternative but for the church to leave the county forthwith and deliver up their arms, and certain men to be tried for murder, said to have committed in the battle the previous evening. Rather than have submitted to these outrageous requirements, the saints would willingly have shed their blood, but they knew that if they resisted this mob, the lies of the designing and the prejudice of the ignorant would construe their resistance into a violation of law, and thus bring certain destruction upon them. Therefore they surrendered their arms and agreed to leave the county forthwith. The men who were demanded as prisoners were also surrendered and imprisoned, but were dismissed in a day or two without trial. A few hours after the surrender, we arrived at the camp of our brethren on our return from Lexington. The struggle was now over. Our liberties were gone, our homes to be deserted and possessed by lawless banditry, and all this in the United States of America. The sun was then setting, and the 12 miles separated me from my family. But I determined to reach home that night. My horse being weary, I started on foot and walked through the wilderness in darkness, avoiding the road lest I shall fall into the hands of the enemy. I arrived home about the middle of the night, and furnishing my wife with a horse, we made our escape in safety. When night again overtook us, we were on the bank of the Missouri River, which divided between Jackson and Clay counties. Here we camped for the night, as we could not cross the ferry till morning. Next morning we crossed the river and formed an encampment amid the cotton woods on its bank. While we thus made our escape, companies of ruffians were ranging the county in every direction, bursting into houses without fear, knowing that the people were disarmed, frightening women and children and threatening to kill them if they did not flee immediately. At the head of one of these parties appeared the Reverend Isaac McCoy, a noted Baptist missionary to the Indians, with gun in hand, ordering the people to leave ordering the people to leave their homes immediately and surrender everything in the shape of arms. Other pretended preachers of the gospel took part in the persecution, speaking of the church as the common enemy of mankind and exulting in its afflictions. On Tuesday and Wednesday nights, the 5th and 6th of November, women and children fled in every direction. One party of about 150 fled to the prairies, where they wandered for several days, mostly without food, and with nothing but an open firmament for their shelter. Other parties fled toward the Missouri River. During the dispersion of women and children, parties were hunting the men, firing upon them, tying up and whipping others, and some they pursued several miles. On Tuesday, November 7th, the shore began to be lined on both sides of the ferry with men, women, and children, goods, wagons, boxes, provisions. While the ferry was constantly employed, and when night again closed upon it, the cottonwood bottom was much the appearance of a camp meeting. Hundreds of people were seen in every direction, some in tents and some in the open air around their fires. While the rain descended in torrents, husbands were inquiring for their wives, wives for their husbands, parents for children, and children for parents. Some had the good fortune to escape with their families, household goods, and some provisions, while others knew not the fate of their friends and had lost all their goods. The scene was indescribable, and, I am sure, would have melted the heart of any people on the earth except our blind oppressors and a blind and ignorant community. The next day our company still increased, and we were principally engaged in felling cottonwood trees and erecting them into small cabins. The next night being clear, we began to enjoy some degree of comfort. About 2 o'clock the next morning we were called upon by the cry of signs in the heavens. We arose, and to our great astonishment all the firmament seemed enveloped in splendid fireworks, as if every star in the broad expanse had been hurled from its course and sent lawless through the wilds of ether. Thousands of bright meteors were shooting through space in every direction, with long trains of light following their course. This lasted for several hours and was only closed by the dawn of the rising sun. Every heart was filled with joy at this majestic display of signs and wonders, showing the near approach of the coming of the Son of God. All our goods were left behind, but I obtained some of them afterward at the risk of my life. But all my provisions for the winter were destroyed or stolen, or my grain left growing on the ground for my enemies to harvest. My house was afterward burned, and my fruit trees and improvements destroyed or plundered. In short, every member of the society was driven from the county, and fields of corn were ravaged and destroyed, stacks of wheat burned, household goods plundered, and improvements and every kind of property destroyed. One of these bandits afterward boasted to one of the brethren that, according to their own account of the matter, the number of houses burned was 203. The saints who fled took refuge in the adjoining counties, mostly in Clay County, which received them with some degree of kindness. Those who fled through the county of Van Buren were again driven and compelled to flee, and those who fled to Lafayette County were soon expelled, or the most part of them, and had to move to wherever they could find protection. When the news of these outrages reached the governor of the state, courts of inquiry, both civil and military, were ordered by him, but nothing effectual was ever done to restore our rights or to protect us in the least. It is true that Attorney General that the Attorney General and a military escort under Colonel, afterward General, Donovan, and our witnesses went to Jackson County and demanded indictments, but the court refused to do anything in the case, and the military attorney general and witnesses were mobbed out of the county, and thus that matter ended. The governor also ordered them to restore the arms of which they robbed us, but they never were restored. Even our lands were robbed, and their timber were robbed of their timber, and either occupied by our enemies for years or left desolate. Soon after Jackson County had rebelled against the laws and constitution of the general and state governments, several of the adjacent counties followed the example by justifying her proceedings and by opposing the saints in settling among them. The counties of Clay, Ray, Clinton, and various others held public meetings, the tenor of which was to deprive the members of our society of the rights of citizenship, drive them from among them, and to compel them to settle only in such places as these outlaws should dictate. And even at that time, some of their proceedings went so far as to publicly threaten to drive the whole society from the state. The excuses they offered for these outrages were, first, the society was guilty principally of being Eastern or Northern people. Second, they were guilty of some slight variations in manners and language from the other citizens of the state who were mostly from the South. Third, their religious principles differed in some important particulars from most other societies. Fourth, they were guilty of immigrating rapidly from the different states and of purchasing large quantities of land and of being more enterprising and industrious than their neighbors. Fifth, some of them were guilty of poverty, especially those who had been driven from time to time and robbed of their all. And last, they were said to be guilty of believing in the present government administration of Indian affairs, namely, that the land west of the Mississippi, which the government had deeded in fee simple to the immigrating tribes, was destined by Providence for their permanent homes. All these crimes were charged upon our society in the public proceedings of the several counties and were deemed sufficient to justify their unlawful proceedings against us. The reader may smile at this statement, but the public journals of Upper Missouri in 1835 actually printed charges and declarations against us of the tenor of the foregoing. By these wicked proceedings our people were once more compelled to move, at a great sacrifice of property, and were last permitted to settle in the north of Ray County, where, by the next legislator, they were organized into the counties of Caldwell and Davies. Here again they exercised the utmost industry and enterprise, and these wild regions were soon presented a more flourishing aspect than the oldest counties of the state. In the meantime, the majority of the state so far countenanced these outrages that they actually elected Littleburg W. Boggs, one of the oldest actors in the scenes of Jackson County, who had assisted in murder and plunder and the expulsion of 1,200 citizens in 1833, for governor of the state, and placed him in the executive chair instead of suspending him by the neck between the heavens and the earth, as his crimes justly merited. This movement may be said to have put an end to liberty, law, and government in the state, About this time, Colonel Lucas, a leader of the bandits, was elected Major General instead of being hung for treason and murder, and Moses Wilson, another leader of the mob, was elected Brigadier General, and others were advanced accordingly. These all very readily received their commissions from their accomplice Governor Boggs, and thus corruption, rebellion, and conspiracy had spread on every side, being fostered and encouraged by a large majority of the state, and thus the treason became general. In the meantime, our society had greatly increased by a rapid immigration, and having long felt the withering hand of oppression from so corrupt an administration, they had endeavored to organize themselves, both civil and military, in the counties where they compassed the majority, by electing such officers as they thought would stand for equal rights and for the laws and constitution of the county. In this way, they hoped to withstand the storm which had so long beaten upon them, and whose black cloud now seemed lowering in awful gloom, preparing to burst with overwhelming fury upon all who dared to stand for liberty and law.